Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome to another amazing session on the book of Illuminations. I think we're starting on number 13 today. This has been such a valuable journey, and I'm so excited for it to continue. First, of course, I actually really want to highlight, I always highlight the khutbah from yesterday. Yesterday's was unusual in that it was introduced a concept that I thought was just extremely powerful that I had not heard Sheikh talk about before. First of all, don't get scared. It's an hour and a half long. So if you look at the video, you're like, oh my gosh, that's actually not a khutbah, that's a lecture. That's a whole education in and of itself, and it truly is amazing. If you don't have time to listen to it, definitely I would recommend looking at the write-up that we'll do in about, I think, a week's time. But the title of it is The Myth of the Post-Racial World versus the Reality of the Post-Muslim World. And the concept that I'm talking about that I felt was new and really important is this idea of living in the post-Muslim world. He started the khutbah by talking about this idea of the post-racial world that we so-called, that we live in. This is on the heels of the Supreme Court decision to make affirmative action basically unconstitutional, and how that obviously has incredible effects on our world, and Muslims in particular, but anyone who basically is not a white Christian. Sheikh, the reason why this was such an important lecture that everyone really should listen to is he really gives us the history of the idea of race and human rights and how this whole idea of living in a so-called post-racial world works in terms of theory versus reality and what the implications are. And if you and then he actually even talks about the idea of, or what is happening in France. I think people are probably aware of how there was a teenager, I think he's 17, Algerian Moroccan, who was shot by the police there, and how this is also one of the consequences of this idea of living in a post-racial world. The idea is you can't legislate racism away. There is, you can pretend through law that racism doesn't exist and then proceed to, commit all kinds of egregious acts that are fundamentally racist. But we have to understand that there's a huge, long history and a whole picture. And I think that what Sheikh walks you through is extremely brilliant and insightful as to understand how we arrived at where we are today and what the implications are. It's too detailed for me to go through. But we arrive then at this, he takes us through a lot of different situations and things that have happened in this last week. And at the end of it, he talks about how, human rights is really controlled by, or this whole discourse is controlled by white Christians around our world. And what gets talked about, what gets addressed, even in things like the UN about racism, is controlled by people in power. And so when recently, I guess this week, it came up for a UN vote whether or not there should be an investigation on what happened to Syrians who just have disappeared in the war. The difference, in every single case where this type of investigation might implicate, people in power that are either from the U.S. or from Europe or Israel, these were things that were not able to be talked about. But because it was easy to say that maybe these people who disappeared in Syria are, this is the fault of the Russians, or, people that they don't really care about, they don't care if an investigation implicates the Russians or, other people who are on the other side. It went to a vote for the UN. So, shall we look into what happened to these Syrians? And what was extremely telling is every Muslim country voted no. So what that effectively means is Muslims don't even care about what happens to their fellow Muslims. They're not even interested in voting in support of an investigation to find out what happened to fellow Muslims. So we effectively now have arrived at a post-Muslim world. Even Muslims, Muslim countries, so-called Muslim countries, don't care what has happened to Muslims. And it's when you think about that, so that continuum of, okay, post-racial, the myth of the post-racial world and all the implications of that. But we go one step further, and we're actually post-Muslim. It's a devastating idea and a devastating, concept, but it's something that we as Muslims are largely unaware of, and partly because instead of focusing on these large, large issues of where we are, we get sidetracked by very small issues, and quite by design too. So, things like death penalty, things like, issues of sexual preference and gender, or other small issues that really take people's attention away from the larger picture of what's happening from a human rights perspective. So I don't think I've done a very good job of summarizing, but this was a really, really important education. So I think if you can make the time, it will give you incredible insights to the world that we live in and how those power dynamics work. And I also want to call out, I know we have oftentimes so much content, but we have a lot of really smart helpers. For example, I have to really give my respect to someone who has been with us on this journey, Dr. Stephen Connolly, who really provides timestamps for like all of our khutbahs, all of our halakas. It makes this content so much more accessible and understandable. And if you want to even just jump ahead to the parts where Sheikh talks about certain things like the founding of the UN, or what were some of the issues, you can find those things on the timestamps. So I want to say a special thank you. And it's just important, I think, to really take a moment. I actually would like to articulate, I guess, some of the exciting things that we're working on here. Recently, I have started this project to rethink kind of like our website and kind of who we are and what we do and what we represent. And part of that is a look at, what are some other Muslim organizations doing? So, for example, if I look at, Yaqeen Institute, or I look at the Amadix Institute, or I look at Zaytuna Institute, it's an important thing to think about, what is it that these organizations represent and are seeking to do in terms of their objectives and so forth. And we get a lot of people who write and ask if, we can help with one thing or another. And I thought that it would be important just to say, we're really focused on, hopefully, and maybe this is something that's just been in my mind and I'd like to articulate, but helping people to reconnect, obviously, with the Quran, reconnect with foundations of their faith, for self-empowerment, for knowledge, for being able to, be better at doing whatever it is that they do. So, hopefully, being able to empower yourself as, an ethical Muslim, someone who is dedicated to justice, who wants to, affect whatever circle you're in, whatever you touch, whatever you do. So if you are a doctor, if you are a writer, if you are an artist, if you are on the front lines, whatever you're doing, that this knowledge here empowers you to be better at doing what you do. Now, that's not a degree, that's not an exercise into understanding, like what's required for our ummah to get better. This is really sort of an education to reconnect us as Muslims with our foundations and hopefully empower ourselves to be the best versions of ourselves. And so for that, I'm really excited about the work that we do. I'm really grateful for the support that people give us, and I hope that they will continue to getting behind what we do. I mean, we're producing content that I think is valuable for Muslims across the board. And I wanted to share actually a really beautiful message, a couple of messages that I got this week that helped to give some meaning to that. So this is one of our dear friends. She writes, "So I actually didn't learn about decolonization from books or social media. That came after. I first realized I was colonized and needed to liberate my ideas, heart, and soul when I began studying the Quran, not memorizing. Studying, reflecting, understanding. It was lonely. Everyone who talked about the words of Allah talked about it like some rule book. But to me, it was a personal blessing from Al-Rahman, a gift from my Creator as a mercy on me. The Quran liberated me. I believe the Quran holds a divine message for each one of us for every aspect of our life, if we seek it. I believe that because I have experienced it, an experience I don't talk about enough. I don't know why I'm telling you this, but I think it's because I was really lonely at first. I was a new mom, I quit my career, and no one could understand why I could no longer align myself with systems that uphold white supremacy, and cause so much oppression. It still is lonely sometimes, especially because people tend to understandably distrust seemingly quote-unquote religious people, and I don't really fit into the traditional Muslim religious circles. But then I found the Usuli Institute and Sheikh Abul Fadl's tafsir of the Quran in Project Illumine. It provided me with so much insight and clarity and validated a lot of the feelings and ideas I was having. He also gives phenomenal khutbahs every Friday that are live streamed on YouTube. That's today. So if you are feeling a pull towards Allah, the Quran, justice, or if you are just disgusted by the status quo, read an ayah, a sign from Allah that can be found in His Quran. His signs are many. If you aren't ready for the Quran, find His signs in creation, the birds, a kind act, the mountains, the ocean. If you seek Him, even a stone can remind you that Allah is Al-Wadud, the source of love, the unconditionally loving. So she went from being a lonely mom to now having opened a center for women and children in Palestine. And that, is to me the power of what, this knowledge can do. It can take you from one place to, finding your fulfillment, your strength, your confidence in making a difference in your world and the things that you care about. It's hard to articulate. We don't provide degrees, but I hope we provide, empowerment and confidence and, the validation for doing, whatever it is that you were put on this earth to do. And then another message very quickly. You cannot imagine the impact of the professor's words on myself and my wife. This is someone who's requested the Prophet's pulpit. It's just finally someone is saying it with the integrity that the Ummah is longing for. My mission is to spread the word. Finally, I feel convicted to a message that does not have twisted corners in it, something that matches my values and satisfies my instincts. Cannot wait for the class in January. Thank you so much, and my greetings to everyone at Usuli. So this, again, just another message. We get so many of these beautiful messages about how people really feel connected to what we're doing and how, for this person now the job is to spread the message. So I hope that, that others will find this. And with that, I also just wanted to share some good news, which is an update on our SEER project, and just kind of also give a little bit of update about other things we're working on. So yesterday was June 30th. It was the first deadline that I had set for raising $185,000 to commit to one semester of the Sira, and I'm very happy to report that we more than made that fundraising goal, alhamdulillah. And that, I don't know exactly what the numbers are yet, but we have now been able to secure one semester and inshallah are well on our way to fundraising for the second semester. And the update that I wanted to give you is that we, said that we wanted to raise this to start hopefully in January 2024. But, Sheikh and I were talking about this and, looking at kind of a lot of different things that are happening, and not the least of which is the Book of Illuminations here. We want to complete this project, complete this book before we go on to the Sira. And I think at the pace we're going, it looks like we will probably then be able to start the Sira sometime in the summer. So I just wanted to give people that update, alhamdulillah, that we will be able to start the Sira project, but it'll just be a little bit later than we were targeting. And then also that gives us more time, inshallah, to raise funds for a second semester, which is all very good news. And then just, in terms of other projects that we are always actively fundraising for, we continue our very hard work on publishing the entire tafsir, body of knowledge. So that's a huge project. Alhamdulillah, we have, Joe Linhoff is the editor-in-chief, and we've got some other superstars that are on his team. And so that is going to be a multi-volume, multi-year project, but that is going to be our legacy project, as I've said, and that is just going to be simply spectacular. But we, as all nonprofits do, need to continue raising money to make sure that we can continue doing what we do and support that project. And then also we have other very exciting things like Prophet's Pulpit Volume 3 and maybe more. And now with how valuable the Book of Illuminations is, I would love to see this end up also in a book form. And obviously the Sira, once we do that. So we are trying to, fill our pipeline with a lot of really, really important projects that we will leave behind for future generations of Muslims. So I just really want to thank people who have supported us and encourage you to keep supporting, because I believe that if anyone is part of what we're doing, you are part of this legacy that we're leaving behind, and hopefully it will continue to, pay blessings forward long after we've left the planet. So thank you, everyone, for being with us. Thank you for supporting us, and look forward to another amazing session with the Book of Illuminations.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. سبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على الحبيب المصطفى محمد النبي الأمين المرسل رحمة للعالمين خاتم الأنبياء والرسل أجمعين، وعلى آله الأطهار الميامين، وعلى صحبه المختارين، وعلى من اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي يا رب العالمين. Okay, so I think last halaqah we finished number 12, and just a very quick reminder is that number 12 anchors the idea of the nafs, the self, as a mirror, and that what you expose the self to imprints upon the self, and as the there is a hadith, as the hadith of the Prophet, I'm paraphrase it, but it's paraphrase as القلب ليس له إلا وجهة واحدة إذا قابلها النور أشرقت, or something close to that. That the heart can only have one direction. The heart can only have one direction, and if what the heart is directed towards and reflects upon the heart is light, then that heart becomes luminous. Now, 13 is still in the same vein, it's still within the same idea. So first, let's go through the Arabic. كيف يشرق قلب صور الأكوان منطبعة في مرآته، أم كيف يرحل إلى الله وهو مكبل بشهواته، أم كيف يطمع أن يدخل حضرة الله وهو لم يتطهر من جنابة غفلاته، أم كيف يرجو أن يفهم دقائق الأسرار وهو لم يتب من هفواته. And let's see, basic translation. Okay, so this book, I'll take its basic translation and then work from there. How can the heart be illumined while the images of creations are imprinted in its mirror? Or how can it depart to Allah while shackled by its passions? Or how can it desire to enter the presence of Allah while it has not yet purified itself of the impurity of its distractions? Or how can it expect to comprehend the subtle mysteries while it has not yet repented from its faults? Which is, I mean, it's in essence is a good translation, but we'll take it in, because it's a little bit long, so let's take it and break it down into its parts. كيف يشرق قلب صور الأكوان منطبعة في مرآته. How can remember that this builds upon the number 12, and it basically then raises in rhetorical form a number of points. If a heart, what is imprinted upon the heart are material things, then what it is bound to be wedded to is material things. I mean, it is the most commonsensical idea that you can imagine. Whatever you put into the heart is what you will get out of the heart. And when he says صور الأكوان منطبعة في مرآته, it is as if the heart is a mirror. And صور الأكوان, what he here means is not necessarily the images of creation. It is not that he is saying if you reflect upon creation, then that's the problem. Obviously not. But Surah Al-Akwani, this of course has a further elaboration that we'll talk about as to how creation itself is perceived. But for now, that what is imprinted on this heart are the falsity or the superficiality of not divine truth, but physical manifestations of creation. What we in our modern language would call material things, or would refer to as material things. And so and it is very much, I mean, we say imprinted upon the heart, but what that boils down to is when you sit and reflect upon how you spend your day or your days, how much of what moves your passion, how much of what occupies your thinking, how much of what you find your emotions responding to has to do with the material world that you are embedded in, or to what extent do you respond to norms or normative goals? Normative goals is a fancy way of saying principles and ideals. And where is God's place in the midst of these principles of ideals? It has so many people, they really only reflect or they think of God only when they need God, when in their superficial perception they think that they are in a crisis, and they in a state of panic they call upon God. Even prayer, many people pray out of habit and not out of a sense of engagement with God. How can you expect to discover anything meaningful about God if, in fact, that is the extent of your engagement with God? And it is, we have, in the modern age, we have all become familiar with the idea of what you put into your body and the extent to which you can poison your body by the unhealthy things that you put into your body. But what is far more important and far more pressing and far more fundamental is what you put into your heart. what influences, and again, and when we say heart, it is your consciousness. What influences do you allow to be imprinted upon your consciousness? What do you expose the consciousness to? Because what you put in is what you will get out. أم كيف يرحل إلى الله وهو مكبل بشهواته. The journey to God shahawat are desires, which could be short-lived desires like sexual arousal or food cravings, or long-term desires like longings, what you covet. And it is a fair principle in this path is that what you covet is what you will get. What you covet is what you will get. If what you covet is God, and if what you covet are the attributes, the characteristics of divinity, in other words, principles of morality. If I am very comfortable with paralleling or making parallels between attributes of divinity and principles of morality, because this is ultimately what they are. When you strip everything away, sifat, when we talk about sifat al-ilahiyya, the characteristics, the attributes of divinity, what they fundamentally, in essence, are these principles of morality. What your consciousness grows accustomed to coveting is ultimately what you will reap. If what you covet are things related to power, related to prestige, related to reputation, related to fame, related to wealth, that will be the extent of your consciousness. When all said and done, regardless of how much philosophizing you do to try to convince yourself that you are something more than that, regardless of how much you tell yourself, yes, but God is important to me, there is no way around the truth of coveting. What you covet as a human being. Some people in this past have said a human being is what a person covets. What defines you as a person morally is what you covet. Now, if we are honest in the inner gaze, we covet a lot of things that presume ownership of this world. And we'll talk about this more in a bit, but that it is as if we are vested owners in our world. And as we'll talk about, the truth is we own nothing of this world. The truth is that when we say we are passerbys, we are truly fleeting realities upon a world, and even a fleeting reality upon a world that, upon a world whose reality, for the most part, we are not even privy to. So we are a fleeting phenomena in a world that has realities that are far more deep, or far deeper and far more complex than what our consciousness perceives. So it is not just the claim of ownership is false, but it's a double falsity. It's the claim of ownership and the claim of knowledge of the reality of what we claim to own is also false. In our day and age, we talk about a world that is multidimensional, and that is just a glimmer of the reality that we don't live in and we don't perceive and we don't normally, it is not normally a part of what we long for. So when you strip so much, when you confront your passions and you confront what you truly long for, human beings who are on this path will confront the reality that so much of what they long for is driven by psychological impressions from childhood, by psychological impressions in adolescence, by their perception of prestige, their perception of wealth, their perception of meaning, but meaning is often oppressively materialistic and oppressively false because it is anchored on that presumption that you actually own something in this world, which in reality you don't. And including longings for love, longings for passion, longings for companionship, longings for friendship. And when you strip down all of that and you say, in all my longings, where is God in that? Now, it is essential because whether we admit it or not, so many of us, in fact, it is fair to say it is the majority of believers, majority of people who actually believe or identify as Muslims, blame God, whether they admit it or not, but they blame God for their inability to feel near God or close to God. It is their wada al-hal, as they describe it, or their condition attests to, what the reality of their condition attests to, is that, well, I was told if I reach out to God, God will reach out to me, and sort of this willy-nilly confused state of, well, I've done my reaching out, and I didn't feel God, and so never confronting precisely the source of the absence of repose and the absence of tranquility in their life. But when you enter into the state of confrontation, what we've talked about, the state of fikra, the khalwa and the fikra that we already talked about, and you are confronting and stripping away, and then you confront that how little of your longings, in fact, relate to the divine. And what makes this even more absurd is that, as we'll talk about, you are guests in a reality defined ultimately by the divine and owned completely and exclusively by the divine. And so the key in this reality is the humility that is due to a guest that comes onto a situation that they own nothing in, they're entitled to nothing in, it truly a complete guest. But we come as guests and we entirely ignore the centrality of the owner of everything in this reality. So, but it is Allah's justice is that in all of our lives, Allah will make interventions to try to wake you up to how absurd your longings are, to the absurdity of your longings. In other words, the absurdity of the reality that you live in. But ultimately, you are the owner of your own destiny. So if you do not wake up and you continue longing for what you long for, and God continues to be such a subservient, we all talk about we are ibadullah, that we are we are subservient to God. But in this literature, there is so much written, and you can even in Ihya Ulumuddin you can read it. I mean, Ghazali is the most accessible person who's written about this. That the truth of the matter is when you take our passions and our intellects and our hearts, the way we lead our lives, we make God subservient to us, not the other way around. Not subservient in truth, but subservient in falsehood. So the place we assign to God in our consciousness, in our intellect, in the way we relate to the material world or to the world in which we are dropped in, is in fact, but part of God's magnanimity and mercy, and part of God's love, is that despite this, I mean, it's an obnoxious way of dealing with our Maker, God continues giving us and allowing us to steer our own destiny until our lives expires. So this idea, أم كيف يرحل إلى الله وهو مكبل بشهواته, that how do you expect to reach God if the packages that you are carrying, your cargo that you are traveling with, is a cargo that doesn't give weight to God? This is why the idea of longings and what you covet is so important. Because so many of us will stand and say, God, I want to travel to you. Well, if you want to travel to me, then cleanse yourself so that you any of us, if we are going to travel to you honor the place that you are traveling to in a way that is worthy of that place. Well, but how are you going to travel to me if everything that you carry in your life is in fact is slight towards God, in fact doesn't honor God? And this is so critical because in this path when we talk about it is, so often, and I've said this before, so often people say, we want to go on the path of irtiqa, and how they come and ask me, and how do we go on the path of irtiqa? And they think that the path of irtiqa is just sitting somewhere doing dhikr. That, if you just do dhikr for a long period of time, then that's how you are going to achieve these experiences that will open your sight to the supernal and to the world of malakut and the world of divinity. Yes, dhikr is important. Dhikr is important. But dhikr itself is but a vehicle to self-cleansing. When we say self-cleansing, what we mean is that you confront the reality of your shahawat. Confronting the reality of your shahawat means confronting the reality of what you covet and what you long for. What fundamentally ignites your engine. And it is this if your dhikr doesn't lead to cleansing, then it will never lead to irtiqa. Your dhikr must be a mechanism of self-cleansing. Self-cleansing is confronting the reality, the truth of how much your consciousness actually does care about God. To what extent does your consciousness actually takes God seriously? To the extent you cleanse yourself will be the power of your receptivity towards the divine. And this is my own testimony, is that you're told by teachers that you can never speculate on why a person has certain experiences of illumination and insight, experiences that go beyond our material world, that you are given an insight in the reality of Tawheed, what is often referred to as the secret of Tawheed, Sirr Tawheed, which I'll comment on a bit later. But why a person achieves it, in one span of time as opposed to another span of time. Why one person might take them months, while another person takes them years, and you're told that this is something that is between a person and Allah, and we can never speculate on it. But my experience has taught me that, and Allahu A'lam, this is my humble opinion, is that to the extent of your cleansing and the honesty in your cleansing is the span of your journey. People who were very honest in confronting themselves about what their inners are made of. It seemed to, in every situation I've seen, seem to reach their goal much faster than people who have, and usually when they have a hard time confronting, it's that self-cleansing, it's because they have an unyieldy ego. And an ego is not, people often confuse being polite with humility. There are, and Muslims in particular, I've encountered this all the time with Muslims, this affectatious, false sense of politeness that conceals an enormous amount of arrogance. So, Muslims, they'll be polite in the sense of, oh, salamu alaikum, brother, salamu alaikum, sister. They go through all the pretenses of being polite. But it is not the politeness that actually is a natural outgrowth of humility. It is a politeness that is put on as a form of theater because of a entirely intellectualized conception of what piety entails. So, to be pious is to say brother or sister, but not to feel it. So you don't actually feel any brotherhood or any sisterhood or none of it. You don't actually even have a basic understanding of what humility is, or even a basic sense of self-effacement, and or the repulsion to fame or repulsion to adoration, which are all parts of humility, or even the repulsion to sound like the know-it-all, which is, again, it is impossible for someone to have humility and to be eager to always tell people what is going on, what's what and what's up. Rarely, sadly, have I encountered in my long journey in the United States with American Muslim communities, rarely have I encountered true humility. So rare. I've encountered tons of people who find humility, who have the pretense of humility, who have an intellectual image of what piety is, in sort of the way you imagine theater, and they execute the theater of piety, the pretense and the theater of piety, but it quickly goes away the minute they're challenged. So the minute you challenge them on anything, the theater of piety, poof, evaporates. It's gone. Because it's exactly that. It's just smoke. There's no reality to it. Humility, it's like you're raised as a child with it, and it's like learning an instrument. The older you are, the harder it is to learn. But it is an art, an habit, and a taste that it's like the taste in music, or the taste in art, or the taste in beauty, an aesthetic in itself. Okay. The elaboration كيف يطمع أن يدخل حضرة الله وهو لم يتطهر من جنابة غفلاته, that's the same basic idea, is that how can you hope to enter Hadratullah is in Allah's presence, but just remember that word Hadra, because we will we'll talk about that further in a little bit. And they have not purified from the ghafla. Ghafla, let's see how he translated ghafla. distractions. He just translated it as the impurity of its distractions. Ghafla is everything that takes you away from the truth of your relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a ghafla. So there is a truth of the creator to creation and creation to the creator. And you, as being a part of creation, you are a part of that truth. Part of that truth, for instance, is what we refer to as the secret of Tawheed, which, as I said, we'll talk about in a little bit. But also part of that truth is the fact that you own nothing in this world and that you are a mere passing guest, and that this world is a reality that you are, and that you are privy only to a very small part of this reality. You know, again, in our modern terms, we say that the material world is only 5% of existence, that 95% of existence is actually it's a part of the world, it's a part of reality that has very weak gravitational pull, that has a very weak effect on light, but that's 95% of. So even in modern scientific terms, the entire material world that we live in and perceive and interact with, it's only 5%. In Sufism, very similarly, but described in different language and different terms, is that the world that you are privy to is only a very small part of reality. That's why there are very wonderful books written about Sufism and quantum physics, because what a lot of quantum physicists discovered is that the mysteries they were able to document empirically, that Sufis were describing centuries ago through their journeys. And there's no surprise there. What part of what you experience in the path of illuminations is that you see this world for what it is, and you discover when you go on this journey is that the reality we live in is so small to the reality that actually exists, that we are actually just experiencing something very, very minor in the whole magnanimity of existence. Where was it? Oh yeah. So the ghafla is anything that distracts you or takes you away from the truth of your relationship to Allah. So what he's basically saying is that he sees these distractions as a form of impurity, and it's like saying, anchor yourself. When you are going for an interview about a job that you actually care about, and someone that, and you say, do your homework, learn about the company that you're going to interview with, learn about the bosses or whoever is going to be interviewing you, and you care enough because you want to be able to say things that grab their attention, things that impress them, things that appeal to their reality. And that's because you want to impress. But it's similarly when you want to journey to Allah, you invest in learning as much as possible, and in cleansing and in learning as much as possible about divinity. at the most basic level about the Sifat al-Ilahiyya, the attributes and the characteristics, leave alone al-Dhat al-Ilahiyya, the truth of divinity is something is step further. So again, it's that common sense point. You have to prepare yourself for the journey. You can't just simply expect, I'm just going to sit and I'm going to just pray a bit more and I'm going to, because I've had people come say, I'm going to after every prayer, I'm going to pray double the sunnah. And they're saying it as if they're entitled by doing that to know something about God. They're not asking my opinion, they're just simply informing me. Okay, here's what I'm going to invest. I'm going to be, after Maghrib, I'm going to pray 4 rak'ahs instead of 2 rak'ahs. And after Dhuhr, I'm going to pray again, depending on whether you believe what the sunnah of Dhuhr is, just double it. Or people who come and say, I sit and I do dhikr and I read Quran and I've, see nothing and experience nothing. And have you actually cleansed? How can you approach God with all your dirt and all your fallacies and all your delusions? And it's not the work that you like to do. It's the work that will actually cost you an effort. Okay, now كيف يرجو أن يفهم دقائق الأسرار وهو لم يتب من هفواته. Now دقائق الأسرار, the expression here, how does such a person hope to understand? Here he translates it as comprehend the subtle mysteries. وهو لم يتب من هفواته, and that without self-cleansing. دقائق الأسرار, I've talked about several times now that the journey is very individual for each of us. The journey each of us has is tailored to yourself vis-a-vis Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No two journeys are identical. The truth of Tawheed is referred to as the secret, as sirr. Not because it is a secret, but because once you experience the truth of Tawheed, not intellectually, but once you actually have a direct experience with the truth of existence and the truth of the relationship between existence and the Maker, what you experience, what you see, and what you feel is indescribable. It is an article of faith among every Sufi tariqah I know of, that it is so indescribable that it is considered a serious offense to attempt to describe it. So it is something that you experience, and it is very individual to the person. And even every teacher that I know of, when their student has, after a long journey, have experienced it, every teacher I know of, when the student has thought to describe it to the teacher refuses to hear and says, no, keep it to yourself. Sirr al-Tawheed, what he's referring to is daqa'iq al-asrar, the subtle secrets, meaning, and that's what he is referring to, is the actual experience of the meaning of Tawheed. It is an entirely transformative experience. There is no human being that has experienced it and has remained the same. It is entirely transformative. It is an experience beyond time and place or space. It is it's like I knew someone who, interestingly enough, was in a country that doesn't really get a lot of rain, but this guy was the only person I know that was struck by lightning and survived. And he told me that being struck by lightning is nothing compared to the experience he had when finally the veils were removed, the experience that I'm describing. So, I wasn't struck by lightning, so I can't compare it to, but that's what he said, is that, that was more powerful than being struck by lightning. I think that if you're struck by lightning, you're supposed to die. But anyway, yeah, okay. So you'll even find in the text فإذا انفرد القلب بالله وتخلص مما سواه فهم دقائق التوحيد وغوامضه التي لا يمكن التعبير عنها، وإنما هي رموز وإشارات لا يفهمها إلا أهلها ولا تفشى إلا لهم وقليل ما هم، ومن أفشى شيئا من أسرارها مع غير أهلها فقد أباح دمه وتعرض لقتل نفسه. What he's saying is that he's describing the ultimate experience of understanding the truth of Tawheed, the truth of monotheism, although monotheism again is a poor word for Tawheed. And he's saying that it is an experience that can only be, it is something that can only be experienced but cannot be described, and it cannot be intellectually understood either. And then he says, and whoever attempts to speak about this experience with those who are not of its people. Now, of its people means your sheikh and those who your sheikh authorizes you to speak with. And of course, your sheikh is not supposed to authorize anyone who's not ready to or equipped to deal with these things. It is abaha damu here does not mean that normally abaha damu mean translated as you can kill them. He's not saying that this person can be killed. What he's saying is what he elaborates on later. It says تعرض لقتل نفسه, that if you do that, it is as if you've killed yourself. If you speak about this experience to those who are not people that you can speak to about this experience, it is as if you've killed yourself, because that will eject you out of the entire dynamic, and whatever blessings you've attained from that experience will be lost if you just shoot the breeze about it. Or worse, if you speak about it and shaitan manipulates your feelings so that that experience becomes, even in the most subtle way, a claim of prestige or claim of special status, that is one of the biggest, gravest sins possible. You immediately find that everything you've gained, you nearly instantaneously lose, regardless of how high you've reached. The minute this type of experience is leveraged for any advantage, even if unintentional, the consequences are disastrous. Okay. One last thing about this principle, because it is very useful. In this context, it was principle number 13. There is always a discourse about, this arose from centuries of students asking questions, who are, as we said, these principles are roadmaps on their journey. So they're actually in practice. Because, as we said, that the soul, the self, is so impressionable, and because you have to be very careful about what leaves impressions upon that self, we all know that the company you keep is a huge source of impressions upon the self, who you're with. And that is why most teachers that I know of will, when you commit to this path, they will set out a whole program of uzla, of isolation, and in which you minimize contact. Either you terminate contact with people altogether, or you minimize contact with people in order to be able to confront the self without adding new impressions that would complicate the process and make the process more difficult to steer and to navigate. But there are impressions that are not negative or neutral, but are actually very positive. And so, in this context, they will talk about صحبة أهل المحبة and صحبة أهل المجاهدة. That if you are on this path and you have your exercises of uzla in which you confront and so on, but what enormously helps is to actively seek a suhbah. And suhbah is companionship. And you are actively, now of course this depends on your circumstances, right? Because if it's just you and your teacher, It could be that the only suhbah you have is your teacher. If, however, there is other people that have reached levels of advancement, then the companionship that you are allowed to keep, the suhbah, there is always and because it's you don't hear much of it in our modern ages. That's why I'm mentioning it. That Ahl al-Mahabba, or sometimes in some writings referred to Ahl al-Tahara, are where you actively seek the company of people who have gone through the process and have cleansed and have the a sheikh, a teacher, has attested that they've reached an understanding about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, an understanding anchored in the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Sohbat Ahl al-Mahabba, so many of the Sufi poems, if you, this is your thing, the most beautiful Sufi poems that you read, the poetry of people like Rumi or Hafiz or Ibn al-Farid or Junaid or and so on. This poetry is written in the ecstasy of Sohbat Ahl al-Mahabba. So you often in this poetry, you will hear the poet talking about how, one of the most famous says, he's talking to the people of Mahabba, people of love, and he's saying, I will seek to come to you whether I crawl or whether I walk on my feet or walk or even if I have to walk on my face, I will crawl to you. Often the language is because when this company, you realize something about love which after the journey you completely becomes a part of your truth, of your reality. And that is, you love people in God and you love God in people. And so the companionship of the people of love that you hear about in this poetry is when the very company of this people is a love affair for the divine. But if you cannot find the company of Ahl al-Mahabba, or Ahl al-Mahabba themselves, the people of love, don't deem you sufficiently purified to be in their company, which is the most common situation, then you seek the company of Ahlul Khidmah, the people of service. Now, this is the reason I'm mentioning this is that people of service is a preliminary step to becoming the people of love. You spend years being people of service. You exist to serve people, not serve the self. You exist to help people. All you do is that you serve. And you do this for years until you graduate to being Ahl al-Mahabba. But it is profound that in this part of the Islamic tradition that it was inconceivable that you can be people of love, or put simply truly people of God. In our modern language, would say truly people of God, without first learning how to be people of service. I exist to serve you. For someone to come and say, I love God, have you served? No, I haven't served. Then you don't. Then you're false. Then all your stuff about loving God is nonsense. Oh, I want to love God. Have you served? No, I haven't served. Then you can't be in our company, because it's a false claim. This is, subhanAllah, while you can study, and there are books written even in English about this, that you can find, while you can study how every Sufi that is, any Sufi who's anyone, you can read about the years they spent in service before they were taken, before anyone, before they started daring to write poetry about their love of God. Because without the service, it's nonsense. What is the proof that you love God if you don't serve God's creation? I just note that in modern day Sufism, I'm often shocked at how many Sufi pretenders there are, who go on blabbing in the modern age about God's love and loving God, who's never gone through the service phase. It's not in their history. And it is truly, these are some of the, just like the elementaries, the ABCs of this path. So just remember this: Ahl al-Khidmah and Ahl al-Mahabba. Let me, hold on one second, let me see if he actually mentions this in the... he should. Yeah, okay, so in the commentary on Principle 13. Yeah, okay, so yeah. وإن لم تقدر على طهارة أهل المحبة فانتقل لطهارة أهل الخدمة. قوم أقامهم الله لخدمته وقوم اختصهم بمحبته, and so on and so forth. So he doesn't elaborate on it very long, but it's there. فطهارة أهل المحبة الفكرة والنظرة، وطهارة أهل الخدمة بالمجاهدة والمكابدة بين عباده ظاهرة. So, yeah. So basically what the Arabic that I've read is exactly what I've described. It's in commentary on Principle 13. And that's rather typical. This is on page 64 in my book, but there are different prints of this book. Okay. Now we get to 14. Take a deep breath. You know what? Actually, let's take 1 minute break where let's take many deep breaths, because 14 is heavy. And just get ready for the heaviness. And intoxicating, heavy and intoxicating. But it is very critical and very pivotal, and one of the most foundational steps. So let's just take a minute. Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So 14 and 15 but are among the most critical and essential in the past. الكون, let's first read the Arabic. الكون كله ظلمة وإنما أناره ظهور الحق فيه فمن رأى الكون ولم يشهده فيه أو عنده أو قبله أو بعده فقد أعوزه وجود الأنوار وحجبت عنه شموس المعارف بسحب الآثار. Okay. Translation. The cosmos is all darkness. It is illumined only by the manifestation of God in it. He who sees the cosmos and does not contemplate God in it, or by it, or before it, or after it, is in need of light, and is veiled from the sun of Gnosis by the clouds of created things. This translation says, cosmos is all darkness which is illumined only by the manifestation of the truth in it. Thus, whoever sees creation without witnessing God in it, or at it, or before it, or after it, is in need of light, and is veiled from the sons of Gnosis by the clouds of worldly manifestations. Both are I mean, they're very close in meaning, but of course you notice subtle differences. So, first, hold on to this idea that cosmos is all darkness. And the original, وَإِنَّمَا أَنَارَهُ ظُهُورُ الْحَقِّ فِيهِ. What illuminates the darkness of the cosmos is, and if you take a literal translation, so it would be it is illuminated by the manifestation of God in it. Now we pause here and we think, is he saying, or is this genre of literature generally saying, because it replicates much of what you find in this literature, is he saying that cosmos was darkness and God coming to this darkness is what illuminated it? That would presuppose a sequence, and sequence presupposes a chronology, and chronology presupposes time, which is impossible because before God there is no time. And because before God there is no time, there is no chronology, and there is no sequence. So he is not saying that darkness preceded God. That would be simply heretical. But we'll give this even something more concrete in a little bit. Um, um, yeah, anyway. Okay, I was, there's a hadith that just popped into my mind, but let's get to the hadith in a little bit. But it is the same idea that you find in the Quran, that Allah is the lights of the heavens and earth. What we do know, because Allah said so in the Quran, is that God is the light of the heavens on earth. God is the light of the cosmos. We cannot say anything that about a time chronology, because time chronology is in the realm of created things. So there is maybe there is a hadith. I hope I can find it. Hold on. That I think helps. Okay, maybe it will come through, but it is the poorly paraphrasing the hadith, and I hope I run into it. A man comes to the Prophet ﷺ and asks him and says, before God, before Allah, was there darkness in the world? And the Prophet responds to the man by saying, you are supposing that before God there was time and space, and time and space were but created by God. Before God, there was no time or space. Now, that's the basic meaning. You found it?
I think it's Sayyidina Ali.
Oh, is it Imam Ali who said it?
It starts here. No.
Oh, yes. No, you're right. Yeah, it is Imam Ali. Yeah, it is not the Prophet. Imam Ali. So a man comes to Imam Ali and says, where was God before creation? Did God have a place? هل أين كان ربنا؟ أو هل له مكان? Does God have a place, or where was God before creation? And Imam Ali paused for a little bit, then said, قولكم أين الله سؤال عن مكان، وكان الله ولا مكان، ثم خلق الزمان والمكان وهو الآن كما كان دون مكان ولا زمان. So he says, your question about a place presupposes space and time, when Allah was without space and time, and then God created space and time, but God remained beyond space and time. So it is, yeah, this is the one that I was thinking about. Thank you. So now, it is important because there is among the sects of Islam, there was now an extinct sect that I think from the influence by Zoroastrianism, it believed that God was an actual material light that came unto the darkness of the cosmos. But the very concept of passage of time and the very idea of space is in the created realm. Interestingly, this is the book that I referred to last week by this astrophysicist. And of course, he, as I said last time, he writes in a rather scientific style. But the astrophysicist, this is a guy called Hugh Ross, who's at University of Toronto. What caught my attention is that he describes the reason that he is a believer, or one of the reasons that he says that he's a believer, is that scientifically, this cosmos had a starting point. And if it had a starting point, then it is a created thing. And if it's a created thing, then, which he sounds like the medieval philosophers of Islam, if it had a starting point, so it's a created thing, and if it's a created thing, then it had a creator. But the creator, we know nothing, and we are incapable of understanding anything about the reality of the creator, who is beyond the created space and time paradigms. So, Allah illuminates the cosmos in the sense that the cosmos is but an attestation of the divine. So this is at the most basic level, that the cosmos testifies as to the creator. The creator testifies to the created, to the creator. The truth of the cosmos is darkness and non-existence. What existence the cosmos does attain comes from the creator. So it is not darkness in the sense of, is this dark matter, or is this antimatter? It is darkness in the sense of, it is non-existent without the creator that gave this cosmos light. Now, but it is also described as darkness in a different sense. And that is, although it attests to the creator, and although the creator manifests in creation, at the same time, creation veils the creator. So, and this language, is quite typical. So, الكون من حيث كونيته وظهور حسه كله ظلمة لأنه حجاب لمن وقف مع ظاهره عن شهود ربه. So, ولأنه سحاب يغطي شمس المعاني لمن وقف مع ظاهر حس الأواني. So what the text is saying is So, on the one hand, it does attest to the divine. It is where the Creator is manifested. But on the other hand, for those who cannot see beyond the created, for those who look at the material and see nothing but what is material, that same reality can and does veil the Creator. It is as if think of it this way. Clouds are, in some ways, in every way, a manifestation of moisture and a manifestation of rain. But at the same time, for those who do not understand the reality of clouds, the clouds can veil moisture and can veil the rain. The sun is the source of light. But for those who try to stare right into the sun, in fact, the sun can have a blinding effect on those who attempt to just stare at it right out. And so why is all of this important? Because, as you say, okay, so who fails to see beyond material things into the luminous truth of things. So فكان الكون بهذا الاعتبار كله ظلمة وإنما أناره تجلي الحق به. So that for that person who cannot see beyond material things, in reality, the entire cosmos becomes a veil to the truth of the Creator. And they look and they see, but what they see are material things. But if they are able to go beyond the material to the truth of meaning, to the true meaning of things, then this creation becomes actually a testament to the luminosity of the divine. Now, so نفذ إلى باطنه رآه نورا ملكوتيا. That if you are stuck at the material, you will only see عالم الجبروت. Jabarut means the created. Jabarut literally means the world that had no choice in being. You look at it and you see this compelled world, the material world, the world that goes through its chemical reactions, its physical reactions. It has no choice. The bird that acts according to instinct, everything in creation that acts according to instinct, there is no choice. And you come to this world and you see nothing beyond that world of Jabarut, beyond the world that is because it is. And you think that the world is the beginning and the end. But beyond the world of Jabarut is the world of Malakut. And Malakut is literally the world of truth, of inner truth or ultimate truth of things. And beyond the world of Jabarut, beyond the world of what exists without choice, is the world of Malakut, and that is the world of divinity. And so, when he says that the cosmos is all darkness, he is talking about something relational, that its darkness pair the world of Jabarut. It is as if beyond in many ways, the sun, which gives us light on earth, is in many ways a falsehood, because it's a star going through chemical reactions that it has no choice in going through. And beyond the sun, you have an ultimate silent reality of material things upon material things, none of which has a will that activates it. The active will in the cosmos is the will of God. And that is why human beings are such an astounding thing, because we are us and what other creatures, the jinn, that Allah has privileged with the will of choice. We are the only, let's forget jinn because they're a whole different topic. But for the purposes of, again, was excluding jinn, we are the only creatures who have the will to defy Jabarut, to defy the world of compulsion. Allah is Al-Muqtadir and is Al-Qayyum. These are among the attributes of God. Al-Qayyum means the one who is constantly upholding things, constantly maintain things. Al-Qadir is, or Al-Jabbar, also another attribute, is the one who compels things. Human beings, through their will, and although this is a multi-layered issue, but human beings, through their will, can exercise the choice not to follow the path of God, to deny God, to refuse to see the truth of Malakut behind Jabarut. To say, I refuse to see you, God, as the active will in all creation. I limit what I choose to see to creation and nothing but creation. That is an awesome power and an awesome responsibility, the implications of which we will see. But what makes the world of Jabarut, the world of material creation, meaningful is the existence of the Malakut, is the fact that beyond that material world, you just scratch it, you will see all the evidence of the active will of the divine. I mean, this is one of the things that, again, and this is just the most recent book that I've read, but the book I'm referring to, by the way, for those of you who were not here last halaqah, The Creator and the Cosmos by Hugh Ross. There's so many. This is more scientifically, the language is more scientific than others that I've read, which are more layperson friendly. But anyway, which all emphasize that the created world is as if one big testament to an intelligent designer and an active will that maintains this created world against all odds, because all the odds are against the survival of Earth, for example, and life on Earth, but that there is a constant intervention that maintains this world. Anyway, so then what the point that he then is that whoever peers or ever looks at this created world and doesn't see the truth of the Creator all around, and so when he says عنده, with it, or قبله, before it, or بعده, after it, what he's saying is that it is not, you, when it comes to the Creator, you cannot think in sequential terms and you cannot think in terms of time and space. The only way we can understand the Creator in looking at the world of the created is that the Creator is before it and after it and with it, above it, under it, and as we will see, there's more that will come. And that beyond the material world is a world of illuminations, what they often in Sufi literature refer to regularly as shumus al-ma'arif, the sons of enlightenment. And this created world can be a path to the sons of enlightenment or can be an obstacle to the sons of enlightenment. It depends on you. And that is why Sufis are never surprised when someone says, I look at the same created world and I see nothing. Because in fact, Sufis are sort of like the precursors to the science of psychology. Because they would look at you and say, well, considering everything imprinted in your consciousness, it is hardly surprising that you don't see anything beyond the and your consciousness cannot be altered without an active will and hard work to get your consciousness to see something beyond the created world. And that is also why, as we will see, often in the theology of Sufis, to say they're very forgiving, because there are many people who don't even have the wherewithal or the understanding to undergo a process of cleansing their psychology so that they will have a fair chance of perception. It's not an excuse for those who could, but at the same time, it is entirely at odds with the power of illumination, the power to see, to be judgmental. Judgmentalness comes from arrogance, from an ego. And humility is allergic to being judgmental. The nature of humility is that it is constantly looking at its own faults, that when it is confronted by the faults of others, it rarely can muster the gall to peer long enough at the faults of others. one of the things about this path is that, on the one hand, it puts you in a state of constant longing to be in the company of your Maker and to meet your Maker. You long for it, you ache for it. But at the same time, you fear it, you're terrified of it, because you never know if you're worthy. I mean, in fact, the entire journey constantly drills into you all the ways that you are not worthy. But anyway. Okay. So now, we introduced the idea of Shumus al-Ma'arif, the sons of illumination, that material things can either be a veil or can be a path, and it depends on you. But one of the, and maybe here, okay, let me do 15 and then introduce this idea. So, when we say Allah is the light of the heavens and earth, we understand that it is as if saying Allah is the meaning of the heavens and earth. The heavens and earth are but jabaruti things. They are material things that function according to a program. That program that rules every created thing in itself is meaning free. Meaning for created things, for that code that rules the will of all created things, you can only attain understanding of creation by going beyond the world of Jabarut to the world of Malakut, i.e. the world beyond the material things. And this is the experiences with this world is what the entire process of cleansing and so on that we've been talking about is what readies you for. So then we come to 15, and he introduces a further idea. Okay, so مما يدلك على وجود قهره سبحانه أنه حجبك عنه بما ليس بموجود معه. Okay, so what points to the existence of God's omnipotence is that God has veiled you from God's self by that which has no existence alongside of which has no existence alongside of yourself. The ma'ahu here doesn't refer to God. Let me see if this guy understands it the same way. Okay. This guy actually, it says, that which shows you the existence of God, omnipotence, is that God veiled you from God's self by that which has no existence alongside of God. Well, okay, well, the substance of the idea is what matters, whether Ma'ahu refers to God or to the perceiver. So here, what this goes back to is that in Sufism, they describe all material things as not just Adam, but also Wahm. All material things are Adam, meaning that they're temporal. They exist for a period of time, whether that period of time is centuries or years or minutes or seconds. And creation is a virtual education in the relativity of time. There are things that live for but seconds, there are things that live for minutes, there are things that live for days, there are things that live for weeks, there are things that live for years, there are things that live for centuries, but regardless, everything has an end. Whatever is temporal in Sufi thought is also an illusion. It has no inherent reality. Now, this is often misunderstood by cowboy Sufis of our modern world. You know, these Sufis that basically, went and studied for a year or two with someone and then came back to the West and said, oh, we're Sufi masters, here we are. It is not that they're saying that everything is illusory and therefore non-existent. What I'm referring to, cowboy Sufis often take this to mean that since nothing really exists, then nothing has value. And I can't tell you how many young people have been misled by this, in that they're told, oh, only God has value, nothing has value. And so it's a contradiction that is irreconcilable. So then you encounter Sufis who actually treat people or treat animals or treat nature like garbage, because they think that only God is real. Everything else is, and they tell you, everything is a shadow. Oh, you read, everything is Dhilal, everything is Adam, everything is Wahm. So it's illusory, so it has no value, it has no rights, it has no worth. Well, then if that is really what you understood, then you ought to have remembered that then by that logic, you are Adam, you are an illusion, so you should have no desires, and you should have no ego, and you should have no will if everything is an illusion and everything is Adam and everything. But, of course, they apply it to everything but themselves. What they mean by it is something very specific. That whatever is not independent in and of itself, بذاته, is a contingent reality. And whatever is a contingent reality is a temporal reality. It's a passing reality. And so the only constant reality is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything else is contingent upon its Jabaruti program, its world of preordained coding, and it is also contingent upon God's will. So its reality and its value is derived from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but not from its that, not from its very own nature. Now, when it comes to the world of hukuk, as we will see, that in fact it doesn't make things less worthy, it makes things more worthy. Because when I deal with the environment, for instance, I am not dealing with something that is owned by itself. I am not free to say how much is a tree worth in the objective sense. Its worth comes from the fact that it is the child of the Creator. And so I am never free to take liberties with the rights of existing things, because these rights come from the Creator. And unless I can prove on the basis of an ultimate right, like justice, for instance, that enables me to limit its rights or cancel its rights. So for as we will see, because as we go on with this journey, it becomes even clearer and clearer. Even when it comes to let's take anything, a flower or a plant. By what right does this plant have to exist? Well, in and of itself, it has no right, because if it's self-referential, if it refers to the self, then you can compare the right of a plant to the right of a human, or the right of a plant to a right of an animal. And then you can say, well, the right of a plant in reference to itself doesn't even come close to the right of a human in reference to itself, because a human has all these other things like rationality, dexterity, stands upright, blah, 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 all these things. But if the right is derivative from the Creator, then all rights are equal. And the only time you can then discount the right of a plant, if in reference to the rights given to the Creator, you may discount the right of that plant. And you discover then, of course, the takeaway from that is that the rights that the Creator has given you to discount the right of any other thing in God's creation are very limited and highly constrained. But you may not take liberties. You cannot simply say, well, I deem this to be more worthy than this. So the issue of the that, bidatihi, is critical here. So what is the point of principle, of principle 15 is that those contingent things, those created things, can act and do act as a hujub, as veils to the truth of the divine. But it is at the same time Allah's qahr, Allah's power manifests in these contingent things. So they play, as we said, and then it depends on your own willpower whether you see them as hujub or you see them as indicators, whether you see them as things that veil you from the divine, or but what the point that principle 15 is trying to get to is that ما منع الأبصار من رؤية الله إلا قهرية نوره, that you see the divine in created things. But why is it that you see the divine in created things? And why is it that those created things can actually act to veil the divine? It is because the truth of the divine is thoroughly overwhelming for the created. The truth of the Creator is thoroughly overwhelming for the created. What is the best example of this? And the example they always give, that it is like you can see the sun by the evidence of the light that the sun shines on things. But if you stare directly in the sun, it is overwhelming. So creation testifies to the divine, and at the same time could veil the divine. But there is even another, a more important idea here, is that you start out your journey by experiencing creation as testifying to the divine. Creation points to the divine. As your journey goes on, and as you have the experiences of luminosity, as created things lose their properties of veiling, their hujub, as they lose their properties of hujub, veiling, what happens is entirely transformative. What happens is that you no longer see created things as testifying to the divine, but you see the divine as the evidence of created things. Put differently, what settles in your consciousness is that created things are really a mirage. They appear real. They are, and let's even in scientific terms, they're molecules, right? and their molecules arranged in a certain way. But you don't see them in terms of molecules. It is our construction of reality that sees a rug, sees a chair, sees a computer, sees a microphone. If we would see with different eyes, the way that I see reality is different than the fly that's buzzing around me sees reality. That's different than the way a dog sees reality. It's different than the way a cat sees reality. All of us are perceiving the same reality, but we're seeing it in very different ways. Does this reality have a truth? Well, at the molecular level, yes, it has a truth. Do any of us see it at the molecular level? No. But even beyond the molecular level, is there a truth to this reality that even transcends its molecular level? And the answer is yes. What is this truth that transcends the molecular level? In our language today, it is maybe, waves. What do you call it? Vibrations, right? Everything is just vibrations. Okay, this is still in modern terms. But what is beyond the vibrations? The truth ultimately is God. Behind all creation, it is like, and this is in modern language, it is like the truth behind all vibrational energy that are basic constituent elements of reality. Now, once you have that experience in which you see the way that God is just at the center, is not before, not after, not above, not below, not inside, not outside, but is everywhere in relation to created things. Once you see that, you cannot unsee it. But then you don't see things as attesting to the divine. You look at things and you see the divine in everything. And this is the critical thing. So this is why when you get to 16, look at 16. So 16, look at the language. How can it be conceived that something veils God, since God is the one who manifests everything? How can it be conceived that something veils God, since God is the one who is manifest through everything? How can it be conceived that something veils God, since God is the one who is manifest in everything? This is 16. How can it be conceived that something veils God, since God is the manifest to everything? How can it be conceived that something veils God, since it was the manifest before the existence of everything, of anything? How can it be conceived that something veils God, since God is more manifest than anything? How can it be conceived that something veils God, since God is the one alongside of whom there is nothing? How can it be conceived that something veils God, since God is nearer to you than anything? How can it be conceived that something veils God, since were it not for God, the existence of everything would not have been manifest? It is a marvel how being has been manifested in non-being, and how the contingent has been established alongside of God, who possesses the attribute of eternity. So here it is God's attributes shine out in every object of creation. All living things manifest God's attribute of al-muhyi, the giver of life. Even dead things manifest the attribute of God, al-mumit, the giver of death. So if everything is a substratum for divine illumination, how could it be, in truth, that anything can veil God? And here there is part, sort of the normative idea that nothing should veil God, because if you see the truth of it, they cannot possibly veil God, whether they are living or whether they are dead. And the critical idea here is that they all manifest attributes of God, sifat ilahiyya. They have no that, they have no essence, but they all reflect attributes of divinity, as you do, as human beings do as well. We all reflect attributes of divinity. But the other important idea is that you can see creation as a path to God, or the higher point is to see creation through God. So you can no longer relate to creation except through being fully anchored in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So often students go and ask, well, yeah, okay, but what does that can you concretely explain what this means? How does that make a difference if you haven't had the experience that you're talking about, where you see the truth of things, and then you see how God connects to all living things, all creation, and if you haven't had that experience, what does that really mean? Well, take something like when we say al-hub fillah, I love you in God. I'm sure all of you, if you're raised Muslim, you were raised with the idea, oh, we Muslims will love our brothers, we love our sisters in God. Uhibbuka fillah, I love you in God. But ask yourself, how many of us have actually experienced it? I mean, to be very frank, you go to an Islamic center, you see fellow Muslims, you don't love them. In fact, they could annoy you. They get on your nerves. They come and start, pontificating or trying to tell you. Loving in God, it's because that loving in God is where you understand human beings through God. You don't understand God through human beings. So how does it make a difference? Whether I meet people, let's say most people, especially if they haven't had this experience or these types of experiences, they could meet, let's say they meet 10 people, and all 10 people are former Muslims. If they understand God through people, their faith will be affected. You can't help it. Those people were Muslims, they left Islam. If you understand people through your understanding of God, it is impossible for your faith to be affected. So it is the way you relate to love, the way you relate to relations, the way you relate to goals. Now, there is a critical point about all of this, and I think maybe that will help solidify but before I get to this point, in this path, there's a very important concept that there's a lot about, there's just a lot about, and that's the concept of fana. Again, a concept that is often misunderstood, but where was it? Yeah. Fana is when literally it's like dissolving the self into something else. And in this path, when you are understanding God as the truth of everything, and all material things have no inherent truth, they have the only inherent truth they have is derived from their maker, from their creator. You start understanding that what's the word for fana?
People translate it as annihilation.
It's often translated as annihilation, but it is. I don't like this word because it people think that it is some form of self-undoing or self-destruction or things like that. But fana is the dissolution of falsehood into a truth. The very concept is that you dissolve the falsehood of something into the truth of a thing. Now, why am I mentioning this? It's because to help understand the concept of fana, which, as in this journey, you start dissolving away illusions, pretenses. The first thing that you start dissolving away is your ego. You start dissolving false longings, false coveting that is false or improper or that offends the divine. That there are 3 levels of fana, and it helps a lot in understanding this. That is that first, what they refer to as فناء الأفعال or فناء في الأفعال, is that you start understanding that the true acting power in creation is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you understand the centrality of Allah's acting power in everything. And that there is no acting power that could contravene the acting power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is critical in building your faith and in building your understanding of your relationship to Allah. Second is فناء الصفات, where you understand, or where your iman, your awareness, your consciousness becomes cognizant, fully cognizant of that there is no true qadir, there is no true enabler, there is no true alim, there is no true source of absolute knowledge. There is no true samia, no true all-hearing, all-knowing, except Allah. So it is fana' al-sifat is where you understand the attributes of Allah that are absolute, and or the absolute attributes of Allah, and what does the absolute attributes of Allah mean in terms of your relationship to Allah. And then finally, and this is very is fana'u dhat, which a lot of modern Muslims consider, especially the Ahl al-Hadith type, consider heretical. Fana'u dhat is where you let's take the non-controversial aspect of it, but at least the one that I believe in, is that لا موجود على الإطلاق غير الله, that there is truly nothing that exists in a non-contingent fashion, in an absolute real fashion, except Allah. So فناء الأفعال, فناء الصفات, فناء الذات. That فناء as to you true understanding of what does it mean for Allah to be the main actor, and at certain levels the exclusive actor in creation, the true attributes of God, and what these attributes mean in terms of your relationship to Allah. And then what does the fact that every existence is contingent, save but Allah, means that all becomes critical in your path towards Tawheed, towards understanding what monotheism is. Why is it important? Because by breaking things in this way, and by working to understand and internalize each of them, you get the experience of the secret of Tawheed. In other words, you do not have that experience in which you see the way God is, Allah is, relates to all created things, and all created things are but in fact extensions or outproducts of the divine, thoroughly contingent and dependent on the divine. I mean, is it possible to have that experience without understanding the فناء الصفات, فناء الذات, فناء الأفعال? Yes, it's possible. But it is greatly aided by this. Now, let me explain as a final point why I've wanted to summarize up to point 16. Okay, quite simply is this. Remember, we started out the halaqas by talking about there is the sharia, there is the tariqah, and there is the haqiqah. There is the sharia. We started out by saying the sharia are the outer laws, the do's and don'ts, but they themselves are law is a last resort. It's giving boundaries to those who have no power to regulate themselves or no perception to understand boundaries. It is never that the law becomes irrelevant. That's never the case. And there will never be a situation where you can just flout Sharia. That's a mythology about Sufism, that Sufis can reach a certain level where, okay, they don't need Sharia anymore. But Sharia can never get you to haqiqah. As we review the first halaqah that I talked about this, that Sharia itself, law, can never get you to the point of true understanding of God, or a true love of God, or a true relationship with God. And we said the tariqah is the path to the truth, and the truth is the haqiqah. The truth is the ultimate goal where you before you die, you return to God in fully stripped of all your delusions and all your lies and all your pretenses. You don't wait till you die to go to God, and where you have no choice, and God says, well, how about this, and how about this, and how about this? The haqiqah, the tariqah gets you to the point that before you die, you are volunteering, and you are telling God, I'm admitting all my faults, I'm admitting all my sins, I'm admitting all my weaknesses. I want to love you because I realize there is no me. I am but an extension of your will. And I am completely an artificial reality. I come because of you. I exist because of you. I have a will because of you. I die because of you, and I return to you. So all of this, all the pretense of willpower and separation and independence and autonomy was a delusion. It's completely a falsehood. And to the extent I exercise my willpower in defiance to you, I am just hurting myself, and I am alienating myself from my true nature. And what the net result of that is that I experience sadness, depression, anxiety, but with you, I experience ecstasy and happiness and fulfillment and meaning and purpose. And so this is, if you are locked in the path of Sharia, you never advance beyond. Tariqah is what gets you from Sharia to Haqiqah, and Haqiqah is what we just described. Now, principle 1 to 10 that we talked about are all principles related to Sharia. Principles 10 to 14 are principles related to the tariqah. Principles 14 to 16 are principles of haqiqah. So the reason I waited till now and you'll even find that Sharh of Ibn Ajiba follows the teaching methodology of not mentioning this until he gets to principle 16, is that this is supposed to be an introduction that lays out the path in front of you. And we're not supposed to tell you that this is the introduction that lays out the path in front of you until you've had the entire introduction, until you get that sense of, oh my God, that's a lot of work. And then we come at this point and say, okay, now that we've introduced the skeletal structure of the course, if you will, we've given you an outline of the course. Now understand that 1 to 10 is principles as to perfecting Sharia. Principles 10 to 14 are principles relating to the perfecting of the tariqah. Principles 14 and 16 are principles that relate to the perfection of haqiqah. And so then you breathe a sigh of relief and you say, oh, so I'm going to first work on my first 10 principles as I work with Sharia, and then I'm going to work on 10 and 14 as I work on the tariqah, and 14 and 16 as I work on the haqiqah. And I say, yes, that's the good news, is that first you will work on principles 1 to 10, and you don't actually move to principles from 10 to 14 until you've perfected 1 to 10, and you don't move to 14 and 16 until you've perfected 10 to 14. Starting with principle 17 are the adab, the rules for the student of the wayfarer. So if you look, even if you skip ahead and you look at principle 17, you'll see that it takes you again way back to the very first principles that we talked about. But this time, the object is to tell you, here are the ethics that you must adopt as now you start along this path, traveling from principles 1 to 10 for the beginning stage, 10 to 14 at the intermediate stage, and then 14 to 16 at the advanced stage. What time is it?
10 past 10.
Oh, okay, so I'm sorry, it's past 10. Let's stop for tonight. Okay. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah, that was truly amazing. It always feels like the time just flies by, and it feels like you took us on this incredible journey that is like no other journey. Every session is just so rich, and the only thing that really always continues to strike me is even when you're like sharing with us the English translations now you have 3 different books that you look at, like none of them come even close to explaining or giving us the background or, integrating this knowledge with the things that, whether it's like cowboy Sufis or what we hear, out in the world. This is truly just priceless. It's just the gold. It's like the wisdom, truly the wisdom that is missing, and that I think, I think the more you talk about it, the more like I personally feel such a longing and such a thirst for, really understanding and ingesting and internalizing. And I don't know how, like if you weren't going through this, I don't know how we would ever get this knowledge. So thank you so much for sharing this. The value is just, it's impossible to describe. So, but I think this is something that is exactly what will has the potential to turn things around in our world if more Muslims discover it. Starting first with the tafsir, and this, and then inshallah the seerah and the other things that we have. Like, this is such a beautiful foundation for really, truly, like, rebuilding, Muslimhood from the ground up, from something very beautiful and true and authentic. And so thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us, and hope you have a wonderful week, and look forward to another session. This is really monumental to finish that introduction. That was incredible.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. So thank you so much, everybody, and
Okay.
we'll see you soon, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.